Hi, my name is Loya Robert. Today we are discussing the topic population. Objectives of lesson. As the lesson progresses, students should be able to 1. Define the term population. 2. Differentiate between population and community. 3. List at least 5 factors that can affect population. 4. Define carrying capacity. 5. Mention methods used to determine population of organisms. And 6. List at least 6 ecological instruments and their uses. So what is population? Now population is defined as the total number of organisms or individuals of the same species living in a particular place at a particular time or a given time. Now same species is very important in this definition. For you to have your full mark as a student, please don't omit it. Now organisms of the same species are said to be of the same kind, and so they belong to the same population. For example, if you are in a park and you're asked to count or get the population of the humans in the park. Now apart from the humans in the park, you are likely to see other living things such as plants. You are likely to see dogs, cats, which are the common pets people bring to the park. But because you are asked to give the population of the humans, you only count the human beings and you give the figure, because the humans are of the same species. So you don't count other species. You don't count the dogs, you don't count the cats. Now looking at the first image here, we have faces of youth, teenagers, alright? If you're asked to give the population of all the teenagers here, all you needed to do is to count and give a figure. So if I'm to count, I think I should have 16 people. So I'll say the population of the teenagers is 16. Alright, now all organisms of the same species, they can interbreed and also they can interact together. When we say interbreed, it means that they can reproduce together. Example, like I said, all human beings are of the same species. So all polar bear too can be of the same species. So depending on what you are working on. Note that population is different from community. Now community is defined as several population or group of organisms of different species or different organisms. So it can be plants, it can be animals, which are living together in a particular area and interacting together. Once again, community is defined as several population or group of different organisms or species of organisms living and interacting together in an area. Now if you look at the second image there, it represents a community. In that image you have several organisms, several species. You can see an elephant, you can see a lion, you can see a zebra, a giraffe, and other animals. Even plants are there, grasses and other trees. That this is showing that there are different species or different population living in a particular area and interacting together. So I want to believe that you know the difference now between population and community. In a simple term, population involves same species, okay, while community involves several species or several population. So let's move on. Let's look at the factors that can affect population. When we say factors that can affect population, we mean those things that can cause an increase in population or a decrease in population. The first one we are looking at is what we call mortality. Mortality is also known as death rate. Please don't say only death. Don't write only death. It is death rate. So what is death rate? This is the rate at which organisms die, right? When death rate is high, population will definitely decrease. And when death rate is low, population will increase. Alright. So number 2 is natality. Natality is also known as birth rate. Don't write only birth. They are not the same. What is birth rate? This is the rate at which organisms reproduce their young ones or their offspring. When birth rate increases, population will what? Increase, because there will be more people, more organisms. And when birth rate decreases, population will what? Decrease. That is what we meant by vice versa. Number 3 is natural disaster. Natural disaster are unforeseen situations that or events that occurs in our environment, alright, such as flooding, fire outbreaks, earthquake, and this can cause death. And you already know the effect of death. The higher the death rate, the higher the death rate, the lower the rate of population, or the lower the population. So according to what I have here, I said flooding, fire outbreak, earthquake can cause death, which affect population, thus leading to decrease in population. Alright, number 4 is changes in availability of food. Yes, when there is food, okay, available in an habitat, it promotes health. Organisms are more healthy. It also prevents organisms from leaving their particular habitat. Alright, it reduces death rate, and before you know, it causes an increase in population. It is when there is no food, you see that organism becomes sick, some begin to leave their habitat into another, there will be higher competition, and that can lead to death, and this death can cause what? A decrease in population. But if the food is available, there will be increase, or population will rise. Alright, let's move on. Now number 5 is war. We all know that the effect of war is what? Death, diseases, and starvation. So when there is war, there will be death, there will be disease, and there will be starvation. This can cause a reduction or reduce population. Number 6 is emigration. This is the movement of organisms out of a place or habitat. This causes a decrease of the population of that place. For example, if you are living in a habitat, or an organism living in an habitat, and the organism decides to move out of that habitat, probably because the situation in that habitat are not favorable. Like some people are moving out of our country into other countries because they are looking for greener pasture. Now, this emigration causes a decrease in the population of that particular place. Now, let's look at immigration. This is the movement of organisms from one habitat into a new place. Now, this will cause an increase of the population of that new place. If an organism should move from one habitat into another habitat, now there will be an increase in the population of that new habitat. Let's take a classroom for example. Imagine you have like 20 students in a classroom, maybe in science, and then the student decides to change from science to art class. Now 20 minus 1, so you have 19. So there is decrease in the new what population, but that class the student is going to, there will be an increase because it will now be a +1 in that new class. Alright, number 8, seasonal climatic changes. What do we mean by seasonal climatic changes? We are talking about the changes in our weather, right? Now, when the weather condition of a place is favorable, it's okay, it's nice, organisms will live better, they survive better, right? They can adapt better. This can cause an increase in population because organisms just wouldn't be dying anyhow. Then number 9, we have diseases. Alright, disease can cause death. Disease, pests, in other organisms that can cause death. Alright, disease can cause death. So increase in death rate will definitely cause a decrease, alright, in population. And when death rate is low, you know there will be what? Increasing population. So just take your time and go through these factors. There are others such as competition. When organisms fight among themselves, this can cause death and also reduce population. We have predation, we have parasitism. All these are factors that can affect population. These factors actually have been broken down into two. We have the abiotic factors and we have the biotic factors. But we'll discuss that one in another class. So what is carrying capacity? This is the total number of individuals or population that an area can support at a particular time. For example, if you have a classroom and the total number of seats and students that the class can take is, let's say, 25, alright, the space of the classroom is not big enough for more than 25 students. So you can say that the carrying capacity is what? 25, because that is the total number of students that classroom can support. There are also habitats that they have their own specific carrying capacity that they can conveniently support. So if the number of individuals in an area is higher than its carrying capacity, that is called overpopulation. For example, if your class can support 25 students and then they put in extra 10, that means we have 35. That is overcrowding or overpopulation. And if it is lower than the carrying capacity, it is said to be underpopulation. So the resources is not highly utilized. Alright, at this point of carrying capacity, there is a steady growth in population. Here we have two graphs. The first one is called the exponential growth graph. Alright, it's showing the rate at which organisms grow in a given or the rate at which population grow in a given habitat. In exponential growth, the population of the organisms continues to increase and continues like that, which is not possible because growth don't continuously increase. At a particular time, population comes down. All right, so it's not an ideal population growth, but the meaning is that population just continue to grow. It doesn't come down. Like the meaning of exponential growth. Like I said, it's not an ideal population growth. Now the other one is logistic growth, okay, which is showing the population is increasing gradually, get to a point which is known as the carrying capacity. That is the level um, in which the habitat can support the population, and then gradually begins to fall. That is an ideal population um, graph. Okay, let's move to population studies. In population studies, the following should be investigated. One, the types of organisms. What are the type of species of organisms? We need to know that, okay, especially that when you're carrying out your population study, the kind of organisms you want to study, you have to determine that. Number two is dominance. How frequent, do they occur in the environment that you are studying? How frequent are these organisms found? Which one are common among the species of organisms in the habitat? And number three is the population characteristics. Population characteristics is grouped into population size, population density, population frequency, population percentage cover, and population distributions. Now, when we say population size, we are talking about if the population is large or small. You know that larger population will survive better than smaller population. When we talk about population density, we are talking about the total number of organisms within a given area. All right. Then frequency is how often does these organisms or species of organisms occur, okay, in the habitat. Then we talk about percentage cover. What is the level of ground or habitat that is covered by these organisms? And distribution is talking about how the organisms are spread in the habitat. For example, are they clumped together? Are they evenly distributed? Are they randomly distributed? It's talking about how they are spread in a particular habitat. All right, so these are the common population characteristics that need to be studied as well. So let's look at this. To calculate the population of organisms in a habitat, a sample can be collected and used to determine the estimate of an area's population. What am I trying to say here? For example, you're asked to calculate all the fishes, or let's be specific now, all the tilapia fish in an aquatic habitat. You know it's not possible. There are just too many. We can't count them all. However, we can get what we call samples. We can collect some of them randomly and use them to carry out an estimated population size of the tilapia fish. Okay, the sampling techniques that can be used in carrying out population studies, we have number one, the quadrat method, number two, the transect method, number three, the recaptured method. So let's take our time and go through this method one after the other. So let's look at the use of quadrat method. First of all, what is a quadrat? A quadrat is an instrument, ecological instrument, that is used in carrying out population studies. Now, this method is used to determine the estimated population of plants or organisms that do not move from one place to another. So it can be used in water, aquatic environment, can also be used on land. Okay. Now, a quadrat is a rectangular or square framed structure. All right, it has a known area. It must have its own known area. So let's look at steps on how to use a quadrat. Number one is that you have to determine the species to study. What organism do you want to study their population? You determine that. You choose your location. Which habitat do I want to carry out this population studies? You choose it. Then number three is that you start at the spot on that habitat and you toss. That means you throw the quadrat. Okay, don't forget that the quadrat must have a known area. All right, you throw it randomly from that spot on the location. Then after which you move to that place where it falls, and then you count all the species of organisms that are within the inside of the quadrant. So you count the species under study within the quadrant and you record the number. You have to record, maybe at the end of counting you have 300. You will record the 300 on your notepad. Okay. Number 5 is that you toss randomly several times. So it's not something you do once and you let go. You have to go back to your spot again, throw it again randomly. Don't have any specific position in mind. Anywhere it falls, that is it. Just throw it randomly. Alright, so you do it like 10, 20, or 50 times. Then you, at each time, you count, you record, you count, you record. Then at the 6th point, you have to calculate your population size using this mathematical formula. You go to your lab and do your solving. No, the first thing is to calculate your population frequency. How do you do that? All the records you have been putting down, add all of them together. Your 200 plus your 300 plus your 150 plus your 100 plus your 5 that you have been counting. Add all of them together. Then you divide them by the number of time you threw the quadrat. That's so you get your population frequency or population average. Then after that, you have to calculate your population density. How do you do that? The population frequency or average that you got in the first place, you divide it by the area of the quadrat. You know, I said you must know the area of your quadrant. And the last part is that you have to calculate your population size by now timesing the population density with the area of the habitat you are carrying out your study. Very easy. Okay, let's look at the use of Transect method. This method is used to determine the estimated population of plants at well. It can be used on both land and even in water bodies. Okay, a transect is a rope or a line with marked interval numbers. It can be noted at interval maybe like 0.5 meters or 1 meter interval, all the way from the beginning of the rope to the end. So it has a specific interval marking. Okay, how do we use a transect? Steps on how to use transect. Okay, number 1 is determine the species to study. Number 2 is choose a location and a gradient. Number 3 is you unroll and lay the transect across the area you wish to study. So one person will hold it at one end, another person will hold it at the other end. Then you count the species under the study, touching the line within the whole length, and record the number. So that particular species you are trying to study, anyone that is touching the transect, you count it, all right, and at the end you put it down. You record the total number down in your note. All right. Then number 5 is that you continue do this transect method severally. You can do it like 10, 20, or 50 times, just the same way you did in quadrant. Okay, and at each time you record. All right. Then the next thing is for you to calculate your population size by getting the average. You know how to calculate average. Add up all that you have, divided by the number of tosses. Sorry, number of placing of the transect. The third one here is recapture method. Very easy. This method is used to determine the estimated population of motile animals, organisms that can move from one place to another. For example, we have snail, we have rats, we have fish, birds, we have tortoise. All of these are animals that can be, the population size can be determined because they can move from one place to another. So what you need to do is, 1, determine the species to study. Number 2 is choose a location and catch a sample animal. Now these animals can move from one place to another, so you must have a method of catching them. Either you are using net for the fish, you are setting trap or anything. Collect them. Alright. Now after collecting, you count the animals that you are able to catch and record their number. So you can record their number at maybe like A1. Okay. Number 4 is tag or mark the animals and release the animals back into their natural habitat. Now you can see images of animals that have been tagged. All right, so there is something you always use to recognize them. Just put something that cannot easily fall off or wipe off to be able to know that you have actually caught these ones and you've tagged them. You can see the snake tagged with number 87. You can see the tortoise with 12 on it. You can see the ear of the rat with its own tag. You can see the fish being tagged. You can see the bird, the leg of the bird is tagged. So these are tags that will help you to recognize these organisms when they are caught again. So number 5 is recapture sample animals. So you have to catch them again, maybe like 2 weeks later. You go to the same spot where you caught the first set and you catch them again, then you count and record. So these ones will now be called the A2. All right. Number 6 is you count and record those tagged or marked in the second catch. So in the second catch is your A2. those that are tagged among, you count them as well, and those you call A3. So the population size can then be calculated using A1 is A2 divided by A3. Let me give you a kind of example. If, for example, the first time I catch, I have 200, the second time I have 150, right? Now in the 150, I will count those that I have that are already tagged. Maybe 50 out of the 150 are already tagged for my previous catch. So that is my A3. So all I need to say is what? 200 times 150 divided by 50. I know you got it now. Alright, let's move on. Okay, let's look at some instruments of ecological factors. Certain instruments are used to measure some of the abiotic factors such as temperature, rainfall, and the rest. And these instruments are, number one, we have thermometer, which is used for measuring temperature. We have rain gauge, which is used for measuring the amount of rainfall. We have hygrometer, which is used for measuring relative humidity. We have anemometer, which is used for measuring wind speed. We have wind vane, used for measuring wind direction. We have barometer, which is used for measuring pressure. We have such a disc, which is used for measuring turbidity. We have photometer or light meter, which is used for measuring light intensity. We have slope gauge, is used for measuring land slope. We have hydrometer, is used for measuring density. And we have meter rule, tape rule, which is also used for measuring length. Note that we have more abiotic factors that can as well be measured. Now, there's always a confusion between hygrometer and hydrometer. Please, students, take note of that. Hygrometer is used for measuring relative humidity. Hydrometer is used for measuring density. Don't mix them up. So here are images of this ecological instrument we've mentioned. The first one is the thermometer, the second one is the rain gauge, the third one is the hydrometer, the fourth is anemometer, the fifth we have our wind vane, the sixth we have the barometer, the next, which is the seventh one, we have the such disc, we have the photometer, the slope gauge, and our last one here is hydrometer. All right, wow, it's time for our student activities. This is an activity that you are supposed to do to actually determine your mastery of this topic, how well you understood what is being taught here. So just take your time, go through the questions, answer the questions. If you have any challenge, go back to the video, watch it again, and I believe at the end you'll be able to answer all. But in case you have any questions you ask me, you are free to drop comment on my channel, and I'll be glad to give you a response. All right. Wow, this is the answer to our student activities. So it's time for you to mark yourself. I hope you have 100% at the end of the marking. That is my wish for you always, that you get to understand the topic that I teach very well. All right. Okay, I want to remind you about viewing, downloading, subscribing, and of course clicking the notification bell so that you get first information, or you get my new videos as soon as possible. All right, so at this moment I just want to thank you for joining me in this class. Thank you for learning, and have a wonderful day.